Sometimes things pop up and they go onto the I'll get around to it list. The Sulphur Spring is one of those items. The spring came up in conversation with another historian about a decade ago. I don't remember how the subject came up or how things were worded. For what I remember, I was told of the possible existence of a sulphur spring around the Blount-Etowah County line and Trestle Road, and that's exactly what I noted on the I'll get around to it list. The topic remained on the list for the past decade for two reasons. One was the fact that I had no information on the spring, and all research would have to be conducted from scratch. The second reason was the lack of a medium and proper narrative for the story. There's also the fact that the Sulphur Spring does not fit into a larger story about the town of Altoona. There are several springs and other natural features in and around, and the Sulphur Spring will be generalized with them in a larger narrative. This also leads to the issue of the lack of a proper medium. Since the Sulphur Spring would not fit into book form, when and how could the story be told? A decade ago, I didn't have the answer to that. Now, with the Altoona Adventures blog and YouTube channel, I finally have a way to bring the story to light. Springs are not uncommon in our area. One version of the 1928 map of Altoona shows two different springs around town. Several early deeds mention Rickles Spring around 3 Points, and the area around Trestle Road is home to several different springs as well. However, in all of these cases, the springs are freshwater, not a mineral or sulfur spring. Mineral springs are naturally occurring springs that produces hard water, water that contains dissolved minerals. Salts, sulfur compounds, and gases are among the substances that can be dissolved in spring water during its passage underground. Hydrogen sulfide is a flammable, colorless gas that smells like rotten eggs. People usually smell hydrogen sulfide at low concentrations in air, ranging from 0.005 to 0.03 parts per million. One way hydrogen sulfide occurs is both naturally in a sulfur spring. Hydrogen sulfide concentrations in surface water are usually very low because it readily evaporates from the water. It can also be present in groundwater. Groundwater concentrations of hydrogen sulfide are generally less than 1 parts per million. However, measured sulfur concentrations in surface and wastewaters have ranged slightly less than 1 to 5 parts per million. Sometime after initially learning of the Sulphur Spring, I received some audio interviews on Altoona's history that were recorded in the 1970s or 1980s. In their interview, it is mentioned that someone went to the Sulphur Spring down by the railroad to catch a train. What really piqued my interest and kicked off this research on the Sulphur Spring was a newspaper article I found while researching a different topic. The article, entitled Commissioner's Court's Synopsis of Proceedings, was found in the November 23, 1905 issue of the Southern Democrat. The last paragraph reads, "A third-grade road was opened as follows, commencing at Possum Trot Road near Sulphur Springs, thence in an easterly election along the foot of the ridge to the county line near the Altoona Depot. Doc Layton was appointed overseer on said road." The article confirmed the general location of the spring by mentioning Possum Trot Road along the foot of a ridge, the county line, and the Altoona Depot. The depot is located on the west side of town, between Robbins Road and St. Clair Street. With the road order originating in Blount County, it crossed the county line and ended near the depot. Possum Trot Road was the original road through Altoona and predates Altoona itself. I don't want to dive too deep into Possum Trot, as it will be the subject of my next video. Generally, the road order describes a road originating near Trestle and running east to First Avenue. With all this in mind, Sulphur Spring was located somewhere around Trestle Road. Let's dig into the deed records to see if the spring is mentioned in any of the descriptions. Within the public land survey system, the land around Trestle Road is located in the northeast quarter and northwest quarter of Township 12 South, Range 3 East. The original survey mentions dry creek beds, rocky and mountainous ground, but makes no reference to any springs. In the northeast quarter of Section 4, the land was first purchased from the federal government in 1858 by Andrew J. Hale. Hale only kept the property a year before selling it to W.S. Lumpkin. Like Hale, Lumpkin sold the property after a year to Robert Foster. In 1880, a Mr. Tiller bought the land from Foster. In 1895, Allen Bain purchased the land from the Tiller heirs. In 1924, J.O. Vernon bought the property from Miller Bain. After reviewing each deed, none of the property descriptions contain any reference to a spring. In the northwest quarter, the property was first purchased from the government by James Harris in 1860. By the early 1900s, J.N. Rickles was the owner of the northwest quarter. In 1908, he granted a 2-acre portion to A.C. Riley. By 1922, the remaining portion of the quarter section was sold to W.T. Dyer. W.J. Nichols obtained Dyer's property in 1927. Over the years, the quarter was further fractioned by later owners Bertie Mae Collier, Drexel and Evelyn Thompson, Kenneth Lee Bryant, Charles Gilliland, and Brock Ray. Like the deeds in the northeast section, none of the northwest section deeds reference a spring. Turning to maps for evidence of the spring, the first is in the 1907 plat by property owner Miles Bain. Bain's plat shows several interesting features. The first is the original Possum Trot Road. The second is C Street, which is the platted name for Trestle Road. The next feature is Station Avenue. It's unclear if this road was ever created as it appears on the plat. As drawn on that plat, it would take the name and become St. Clair Street once crossing the Etowah County line. However, later aerial photos clearly show a road running between Trestle and Robbins Road. This road leaves Trestle Road on the south side of the trestle before crossing back over the railroad tracks and joining St. Clair Street. The final feature on the 1907 map is the unnamed road between High Avenue and Station Avenue. Roughly, this road runs along the present course of Highway 132. This plat also raises the question of which road represents the route created by the 1905 road order. Unfortunately, the plat does not show any road south of the L&N tracks, so it's unknown if the road appears on later aerials was in existence at the time. The second map, which is also part of the plat, is a 1924 Vernon Heights addition to Altoona. Vernon Heights was a partial rearrangement of Bain's earlier plat, as Vernon purchased the property from Bain in 1904. This rearrangement clearly defines Possum Trot Road. It also labels the unnamed road on Bain's map as Spring Avenue, another clue to the existence and location of the spring. Overlaying the Vernon Heights plat with a modern map reveals that Spring Avenue evolved into Highway 132. However, it also diverts from the modern route after the intersection with Possum Trot on the southwestern corner of the plat. The 1955 Alabama Department of Transportation Plan's S-32 Tate's Gap to Altoona better illustrates the Spring Avenue to Highway 132 conversion in the old route of Possum Trot Road. In the case of Spring Avenue, when Highway 132 was created, the original road was straightened and widened within the present bounds of Highway 132. Possum Trot is not fully illustrated as it originally ran. Instead, it and the Trestle Road both appear in their current form. After passing Trestle Road headed west, Possum Trot diverted from the present Highway 132 right-of-way before returning. Most importantly, the ALDOT map does not make any narration for a spring within the bounds of the Highway 132 right-of-way. Exhausting written and mapping sources, focus shifted on trying to identify physical evidence of the Sulphur Spring. After the purchase of a cheap water test off Amazon, I set out to test water samples along Trestle Road. Toward the end of the road, there is a small pond which is probably spring-fed. After a quick test with the water strip, nothing unusual showed up. Traveling back toward the trestle, there is a small spring on the right side of the road. A test of it showed clean, fresh water. Terrapin Creek, or Mining Pond Branch, runs off the mountain parallel to Trestle Road and under the trestle itself. Like the other samples, it was also fresh water, although it's likely any mineral content is well diluted by the time it crosses under the trestle. While tests showed no signs of sulfur or mineral water, there are two interesting anomalies located at the trestle. The first is an old rock wall. It's likely this wall was related to the Bain or Sullivan farm mentioned in the 1923 deed. However, it could also predate both farms and be dated to an earlier farmstead at the location. The second find is what looks to be the remains of some type of square basin. Made out of concrete, it could be what remains of a small foundation, or it could be a basin to hold spring water. These remains could relate to the Sulphur Spring, but without any type of information on record, it's hard to know for sure. Striking out twice, I decided to ask the Where the Heck is Altoona, Alabama Facebook page. There were several responses about the trestle, a gentleman who got his water from a spring, and several wells. One response mentioned a well that was dug only to find out it was contaminated with sulfur water. Unfortunately, there was no response that provided information on the Sulphur Spring itself. The Sulphur Spring project was once again put on the back burner until a chance encounter with a resident who lived in the area. When I mentioned the possibility of a spring, they mentioned they knew exactly where it was at, just adjacent to their property, and offered to take me out there. I gladly accepted the offer and was led to the most likely candidate for the Sulphur Spring. The puddle, which clearly contained moving water, was rust-colored and exhibited a sheen along the top. Gathering up some of the water in my hand, it smelled metallic. Unfortunately, I did not have my test strips that day. I later returned with the test strips. Unfortunately, the water was negative for sulfur. However, it did have traceable amounts of iron content, nitrate, and alkalinity. While taking some photos of the rock wall from the top of the trestle, a second rust-colored spring off the backside caught my eye. This second spring is freely flowing out the side of the hill that the west side of the trestle is built into. As it flows down the side, it has rust-stained the soil. It eventually drops down into Terrapin Creek or Mining Pond Branch. A test sample from the spring also revealed no sulfur content. However, like the previous spring, it also contained iron, nitrate, and alkalinity. Maybe the cheap tests were not the way to go, as any trace of the Sulphur Spring remains inconclusive. However, this is due to the lack of historical information. There is without a doubt some type of mineral springs around Trestle Road. Whether one of these is the actual Sulphur Spring is unknown. Years ago, the spring may have emptied into the square basin, before drying up and making openings on either side of the western approach of the trestle. There is also the fact that the Sulphur Spring may be a misnomer. Without historical documentation providing the chemical content of the water, the actual mineral content is unknown. It could boil down to the fact that Sulphur Spring was a generic name for the spring, while in reality it was a different type of mineral spring altogether. In the end, with what historical documentation exists, combined with the on-the-ground research, the Sulphur Spring existed around Trestle Road's trestle. Whether it still exists today and its exact location remains unknown.